Well, again, good morning, everybody. My name is Justin. I have had the privilege for the last several years of leading these amazing kids. And so it's been an honor and a privilege to walk beside them, and we are excited to bring Youth Sunday again. We did this last year, and it was fantastic. And so when Pastor Chris asked if we would want to do this again, it was a pretty easy yes on our part. And so what I want to do this morning, if you want to follow along, there's going to be no slides. I'm typically not a slide person. You probably know that by now. But if you want to follow along, there are Bibles located in the seats in front of you. We're going to be in the Gospel of John today, primarily in John chapter 20. And the reason we're going to do this is it really kind of fits as a good end to what we have looked at this year in the youth group. And so at the start of the year, I was like, okay, so we've done the topical thing, and we've looked at some shorter books, and we've done some hopping around, and we've done a little bit of Old Testament, and we've done a little bit of New Testament, and but what could we really do as a part of the flow of youth group for the year that would hopefully just give them some deep commitments and some deep abiding presence in their faith? And so what we've done for this year is we have just spent the entire year in the Gospel of John. So way back in August, we started with John chapter 1. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And He was with God in the beginning, and all things that have been made were made by Him and through Him. And we just started there and said, so as we journey through the year, we took, for the most part, a chapter a week. Took a little bit of a break for the holidays. We did some fun Christmas things. But we have journeyed now through the entire book of John. And what we want to do today really as a part of that and a culmination of that is to look at the end of John chapter 20. Because in this experience and in this encounter that John gives us, we're going to meet three people or three different groups of people who experience and encounter the resurrected Jesus. And it's really going to set the stage for us to enter into that gospel. And here's why I think this is important. And so our primary text today comes from John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. And it says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, a couple of things I think are important here, and so we're going to talk about that phrase, that theme, that idea, that you may believe. This is why John wrote his gospel, that you may believe. Now, the disciples were probably teenagers. They were young people when they first decided to follow Jesus. And I think it was so fitting that Pastor Chris shared that with us, because I was going to address that same sort of thing. God has always used young people to make bold decisions and bold advancements for his kingdom. Then when God sends that spirit of revival, he does it through young people. Youth are not the future of the church. They are the current church today. That what God loves to do is to stir the hearts and the minds of young people, to capture them, to captivate them, and to say, go and do something in my name. And so when John, now as an old person, is writing this gospel, he's reflecting on that teenage spirit, that youth, that movement of when he first decided to follow Jesus. So that you, the readers, the audience, may believe. Which means that the good news for us embedded in that is that you also have a place. You have a calling. You have a voice to proclaim what God is up to here and now. So John's gospel, in that respect, is a little bit unique and different from the other gospels. It doesn't just tell us what Jesus did. He's going to show us why he does it, so that we may believe. John's primary writing style, his primary purpose then, is not information, though we get that. It's transformation. Jesus wants to encounter us and change our lives radically and forever so that we might believe and then go proclaim. And so what we encounter in this book as we ran through it this last year is that Jesus is the Messiah, he's this Savior, and he is the Son of God, he is divine, and he carries this humanity and then he redeems it. And the result in John chapter 10 is that we get life. Not someday far off in the future. It's not this heaven promise that, oh yeah, when you die you get to live forever. That's there. But John writes to let us know that here and now you get life. John chapter 10, verse 10, it says this: "The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. But I have come," this is Jesus talking, "that they may have life and have it abundantly." That's why John writes this. It's not primarily a history textbook. It's a mirror. It's a reflective device for us. Do we see what Jesus is doing in our own life? Have we experienced him? Have we encountered him? Do we believe so that we might go and proclaim? And so John really does this creatively in a couple of different ways throughout the book. And I'm not going to recount the whole year for you, but there are some important things that I think help us set the stage to understand what it is that John is trying to do. And the first one is that in the book of John, Jesus does not do any miracles. You see, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus in each of those does more than 20 miracles. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke are more than happy to point out, well, here's the miracle here, and here's the miracle here, and here's the miracle here. And they are broadcasting Jesus' miracles all over in Matthew and in Mark and in Luke. But in John, he doesn't do any miracles. Instead, John writes and he tells us that Jesus does signs. Well, signs point to something. Signs give us an indication that something is coming up ahead. As I'm driving and I see that speed limit sign and I see it change, I know that I need to regulate the speed at which I'm driving so that I don't get pulled over. Or I see construction signs and they're to warn me that there's something going on up ahead. I should slow down and be aware of what's going on next to me. In John, Jesus does signs. Jesus is pointing to something. There is something up ahead that you, reader, you, church, should be paying attention to. And in John, Jesus does 7 signs before we get to his resurrection. The first is in John chapter 2, Jesus turns water into wine. So Jesus is at a wedding, and the wine runs out. And it looks like the party's over, and then Mary, his mom, comes up to him and he says, hey, the wine's run out. You need to go and do something. And he's like, it's not my time. And then he goes ahead and does it anyway. And he creates an abundance of wine. And so what we get in this sign that Jesus is pointing to is that when God's kingdom comes, when God's kingdom arrives, there will be abundance. That we looked at this week from the prophet Isaiah, how the prophet Isaiah foretold the coming day of the Lord and this coming ministry and this coming abundance, that when the Messiah comes, when the Savior comes, there will be more than enough for everybody. And so Jesus not just continues that party, but he transforms it and says there is now an abundance of life and party and good news that you get to participate in when you follow me. The second sign, just a couple of chapters later in John chapter 4, Jesus heals an official's son. So Jesus is in one place. He is in this town called Cana. And there's this sick official's son in this town called Capernaum. And they're miles away from each other. And so this royal official sends one of his servants to go rush and to find Jesus. And he says, my son is dying. You need to come back and you need to heal him. So just come back and heal him. And Jesus speaks this sign, this miracle, this healing from a distance. Jesus demonstrates time and distance is of no importance to him, that he can transcend all of that when we come to him, no matter what we have come from, no matter what those experiences are in our past that have left us broken and wounded and hurting, when Jesus speaks life to it, he can cure it. That whatever you've gone through, whatever sort of burdens you've brought in today, when Jesus speaks into your life, he heals it. And then in the next chapter, we get John chapter 5, the healing at Bethesda. A paralyzed man, after 38 years of lying next to the waters, encounters Jesus, and Jesus just says, your day of healing has come. So now there's this intimate connection with Jesus where healing happens. In John chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000 that with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and the people gathered around, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And he feeds them. That over those physical needs and those physical desires and those physical wants that we all crave and just say, I know that something in this world is wrong, Jesus wants to speak into it. That where we are broken and where we are hungry and where we are hurting, Jesus brings comfort. In John chapter 9, Jesus heals a man born blind, and the disciples come to Jesus with this question, right? So they see this man and say, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And so Jesus kind of has to speak some truth to them. And you see there was this belief in the Jewish day that if you sinned in the womb, or if your parents sinned while they were pregnant with you, you would come out with some sort of physical deformity, right? It was this sign of God's judgment. That was the belief. And so when the disciples come to Jesus and they say, well, who sinned? He's born blind. Clearly something has happened. Clearly either he sinned before he was born or his mom sinned. Why was he born blind? And Jesus says it's not for any of those reasons. It is so that the glory of God might be revealed in this. You see, we've all been through something, and we can either say we can use that as this limitation, we can use that as a burden, we can use this as the separator, or we can say, by the grace of God, let me tell you where I've come from. This happened so that God's power might be displayed. And then in John chapter 11, we get Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. One of Jesus' best friends dies, and Jesus grieves his loss and then raises him from the dead. And that's kind of, in a very, very quick nutshell, the first 11 chapters of John, which, if you know anything about the chronology of Jesus in his life, is about 3 years. So through the first 11 or 12 chapters of the Gospel of John, we get about 3 years of Jesus' ministry with 7 key signs, kind of all pointing to something that is going to happen in the future. Then we get to John chapter 12, John chapter 13, and what happens is we go from covering 3 years of Jesus' life in 11 chapters to covering the final week in 11 chapters. John gives us these signs and gets us to the focal point of the story, and then everything slows down. And so we get 3 years of Jesus' life in 11 chapters, and then 1 week of Jesus' life in 11 chapters. Don't you think John is trying to point us to that ultimate sign that he wants to tell us about? And so we journey with, we as the youth group journeyed with Jesus through Gethsemane, through his betrayal, through his crucifixion, through his resurrection. And it's in John chapter 20 that we get some really interesting encounters of people on the resurrection side of Jesus that I think not only just ties together all of John's gospel, but gives us a hope as well. So what we want to do then is look at each of those 3 people, those groups, and what that might be for us. So the first one is in John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. On the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." And then in verses 3 through 10, we're going to just kind of skip past that, but realize that Peter and John go racing to the tomb to see this story that Mary has talked about, and then they leave. John chapter 20, verse 11 then. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. So Peter and John have left, and Mary stays behind. And as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." And at this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? And who are you looking for?" Thinking that he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." And then Mary leaves and she shares that good news. Now, the first encounter of an individual post the resurrection of Jesus in John's gospel is someone who is broken and who is weeping. She's been through it. What she thought she had, then she lost again, and she is questioning what is next in her life. And then Jesus speaks her name. Jesus meets us personally in the midst of our pain. In those moments where we are broken, where we are hurting, where we are lost, where we just don't know what way to turn, it just takes Jesus speaking our name to find life. Now, we, in youth group, when we talked about this particular passage that week, we took comfort from the good news that Jesus knows us by name. We have been created in his image. We are his, that whether this is the first time we encounter the gospel, and if this is your first Sunday here, and this is the first time you're hearing this message, Jesus is alive, and he wants to have that relationship with you. He wants to speak your name. He wants to just like he did Lazarus, just like he did himself, he wants to raise you and your life from the dead, and he wants you to have life abundantly. That's the good news. And if you've heard that and you're like, yes, but I've been following Jesus, the good news continues. He still wants to speak life to your name. He still wants you to experience life abundant and life eternal. The good news every time we choose to acknowledge Jesus is that we get to experience that again and again. That every time we're broken, that every time we're hurting, that every time we feel lost or separated, that when Jesus speaks into that pain, when Jesus speaks into that hurt, we find life. Mary is overwhelmed with sorrow until Jesus calls her name. And then in that moment, we might say that the grief turns to joy. So church, the good news is if you've come in today and you have a bit of grief, Jesus wants to speak joy into your life. So why does Mary follow Jesus? If the point of John's gospel is so that you might believe, how would Mary answer that question? Well, maybe she would say something like, because in my sorrow I found that ultimate restoration. You see, what I saw in Jesus was him who conquered death and gave me that experience of new life. The second encounter is from the disciples in John chapter 20, beginning in verse 19. On the evening of that first day of the week, so this is the resurrection has happened. Peter and John ran to the tomb, saw that it was empty, left. Mary experienced the resurrected Jesus. She now leaves and goes and tells the disciples, I have seen Jesus. That night, so that very same night, on the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for the fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. The disciples, John tells us, were hiding because they were afraid. The disciples were hiding because they were afraid, and Jesus appears in the midst of that and speaks to them and takes their fear and turns it into peace. So the disciples, locked away in fear, encounter a Jesus who says, I'm greater than whatever fear you've conjured up in your mind. Now, I don't know about you, but I am fantastic. Absolutely amazing. It is a gift of mine to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning in a panic over all of these things that I have cooked up in my head while I'm sleeping. It comes so naturally to me that I can lay there and I can worry and I can fret and I can fear and I can say, okay, I better get up and I got to do this. I got to solve this problem. I need to go to work. I got to do this. And do you know what that does? It makes it worse. Do you know what helps? When I lay there in the middle of the night worrying about stuff and I say, hey, Jesus, I'm worried about this. And there's nothing that I can do right now to solve it. So would you? And you know what happens in that moment? I get nice and sleepy and I go right back onto bed because guess what? I'm not God. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to solve it. I don't have to fix it. There's nothing that I can do. I can't speak that name and conquer the problem. I can't go to work hard enough. I can't solve that in my own strength. I'm not good enough. But you know who can? It's Jesus. So if John is written so that you may believe, why do the disciples believe? Well, because they experienced a Jesus who in their doubt and in their fear and in their shame, because remember Peter's there, Jesus appeared and conquered all of it. Even in those moments of timidity, even in those moments of, I should probably say something, but what will they think? Jesus wants to speak to us. And they experienced the resurrection power. And then we get to perhaps the most famous in John chapter 20. Beginning in verse 24, we get to Thomas. And Thomas is famous for perhaps all of the wrong reasons. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, was one of the 12, and he was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas this time was with them. And though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." And then Jesus told them, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Now, Thomas often gets told that, oh yeah, doubting Thomas because the disciples told them and he didn't believe them. And so it's on Thomas, right? Thomas is typically the one we like to blame in this gospel. Let me defend Thomas for just a second. So our previous story, the disciples hiding in a room because the doors were locked. They were in fear and they were afraid. Then experience Jesus, go to Thomas, tell him that they have seen the resurrected Jesus, and Thomas says, "I don't see it." Why would Thomas say something like that? My guess is because the disciples still weren't fully living it out. And I know that because then in the next sentence it says that the next week they were still hiding behind locked doors. Thomas struggled to believe because those that said that they did believe and those that had proclaimed faith and those that said that I have experienced and encountered the resurrected Jesus weren't actually living like it. And so Thomas says, if the sign of the resurrection power of Jesus is that we're just going to continue to hide behind locked doors afraid, I'm sorry, I'm having problems believing. Thomas experienced a world in which someone's actions and their words did not line up. So Thomas is really making the cry of, I want to see the transformation. I want to see what real faith looks like. When faith that has been through it all, when faith has been crucified and resurrected, When the hardships of life have beat someone up and yet they still proclaim the goodness of Jesus and they're out there unashamed and unafraid to go out and tell somebody, that's what I want to see. Thomas's cry is, I can hear you all day long tell me how much you believe in Jesus, but when you hide behind locked doors, I don't see it. Would someone please stand up and testify how good God is out in the public square? That's Thomas's cry. He wanted proof. And more than that, because isn't it just like Jesus? He doesn't just show up and give him proof, he also gives him grace. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Doubt does not disqualify us from the experience that Jesus wants to have us, because Jesus also meets us there. And so we see Mary, who is in an experience of grief. And when Jesus speaks to her, she gets joy. We get the disciples who are in experience of fear, and it gets turned to peace. And we get Thomas, who is in an experience of doubt, and it gets turned to faith. So if John has written that you may believe, why does Thomas believe? Well, maybe in part because he saw. Thomas was one of the lucky ones. Jesus appears and says, here's my hands, here's my side, touch it and believe. But even more than that, I think it's that encounter with Jesus. That in that moment, Jesus could have said, Thomas, you should have listened to them. He could have chastised Thomas. Thomas could have said, yes, but, and tried to hedge his bets. He could have tried to defend his actions, but in that moment, when Jesus appears to Thomas, what Thomas experiences more than anything is the grace that Jesus wants to give us. Because we've all had those nights where we're laying in bed and we're afraid, and that anxiety happens, and we're starting to doubt, and we're becoming worried, and Jesus shows up to bring peace. So the good news for us in John chapter 20, church, is that Jesus has an established pattern of the way in which he likes to work, and that is that he wants to meet you right where you are. In grief, he wants to bring joy. In fear, he wants to bring peace. And in doubt, he wants to bring faith. Because, church, then the very next sentence, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these, church, have been written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Church, we have the Gospel of John so that we might believe, because what we see in their story is our story. What we see in their brokenness is our own brokenness. What we see in their despair is our despair. And church, what we see in their hope can be our hope. That is the power of the gospel today. So what does it look like for you to believe in Jesus? Not just agree that he existed, not just stand here and profess, not in the safety of, hey, this is church, so I can kind of raise my hands and worship and nobody will think I'm too weird. But to actually trust Jesus. To say, in this pain, in this fear, in this doubt, in this worry, I am still going to proclaim that the work that Jesus does matters. That even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, let me tell you what my Jesus has done for me. That just in the way we sang earlier, that he hasn't failed once, so he's not going to fail now. Can you stand up and walk out these doors and share that good news with someone else? The Gospel of John exists so that you may believe, and then take that faith and take that action and go and share it with someone else. Belief is not a one-time moment or a single experience. It is a daily choice to walk in our life with Jesus. And each time we do, it is good news. If this is your first Sunday here and you've never heard that good news before, it is good. Your past does not define you. Jesus has a hope for you. Jesus has a promise for you. Jesus has a future for you. Jesus wants you to experience life here and now in abundance. And if this is your 500th Sunday here, guess what? There is good news for you. That every single day, every single moment when you choose to acknowledge what Jesus is doing, it continues to be good news. And every single day we wake up and we get the chance to say, do I want to believe in that good news? Do I want to follow that good news? And do I want to proclaim that good news to someone? And then each and every time we do, we continue forward the story of John so that others might believe. So here's how I would like to end this. I have asked a number of youth to come up and share that question. Why do you believe? I phrase it to them slightly differently, but I've asked 4 individuals. So let's see, Daniel and Kayani and Elise, and who was number 4? Isaac, thank you. The question that I asked them was, when did Jesus become real to you? When did you decide to follow Jesus? What does that look like? When did you realize that the words that are in this book are more than just words? They're transformation, their life, their hope, they're everything that we've been looking for. And so I've given them like 60-ish seconds to just answer that question. When did Jesus become real for you? That much like we've seen in the story of Mary, and much like we have seen in the disciples, and much like we have seen in Thomas, we each and every one of us come to that moment and that experience where we have to answer the question, when did Jesus become real for me? So while they're doing that, I really want you, church, to do 2 things. Number 1, listen to them. They're going to have some great stories. Number 2, in front of you, you have those connection cards. And every single week, the staff gathers together and we pray over those connection cards. And so if this is your first Sunday here and you have made that decision to follow Jesus, we want you to fill that out on the connection card because we want to pray for you and come alongside you in your faith. And if there's a moment in your life this week where you just want to proclaim that God has done something great and you want to share it, we want to rejoice with you when we pray over those, so go ahead and fill out those connection cards. And if you are going through something right now where you are like, I'm experiencing that grief. I know what that doubt feels like. I'm living in the midst of fear right now. We want to pray for you, so go ahead and fill that out. And then when they are done, I'll call up the worship team and the prayer team. You are free to go leave those connection cards in the baskets up front. We're going to have the prayer team pray over you. But as you're doing that, please listen. So, Daniel, when did Jesus become real for you?
For me, I really started feeling the power of Jesus in my life when he came and provided a community for me in the lowest points of my life. He gave me hope and potential to transform me into the person he wants me to be.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, Jesus provides community in our low points, and that has been an encouragement to him. Isaac, when did Jesus become real for you?
I wrote mine down. So I put, when God felt real to me, it wasn't one single moment, but it was a series of experiences. Time when prayers were answered and when I felt peace that didn't make sense. And when I saw how my life was being shaped over time and how I knew when God was real in my life.
Excellent, thank you. Kayani, when did Jesus become real for you?
Jesus became real for me when I started high school and dealing with all the anxiety and not knowing people. And, just life got so much bigger than it had felt before. He really felt real when I learned that the only way I could get through life was by relying on him and not my own strength.
Thank you. And Elise, when did Jesus become real for you?
So in 4th grade, I went to camp with another church, and the girls that I was in a cabin with were super close, and I felt left out. So I prayed that God would give me a community and give me friends that would welcome me in. And it was like the 2nd day of camp, so every day since then, I would be on the sidelines watching, and someone would invite me to join their group and have fun with them. So I really saw God's, he he cares for us more than we know. And since then, that camp had me giving my life to Jesus, and since then I've just been growing in my relationship with God.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Worship team, you can stay up and we call up the rest of the worship team. Prayer team, you can come forward. In those low points, Jesus brings us community. In difficulties, as Isaac said, Jesus gives us peace that just doesn't make sense by the world's standards. As you heard from Kayani, it's in those moments where anxiety can want to overtake us that Jesus wants to help us through it. And in Elisa's story, when the world wants to exclude us, Jesus tells us that we belong. And you belong in this kingdom as well. Jesus has a story for your life. Jesus has a purpose for your life. Jesus has something far beyond you could ever ask or imagine, that when you choose to trust him, when you choose to follow him, every single day when you wake up, whether this is day 1 of you making that decision, or day 1,000 of you making that decision, or day 10,000 of you making that decision, Jesus has a plan for you so that you may believe. Let's pray.